Some stories don't begin with power. They begin with a quiet lie someone tells the world and an even quieter truth they hide from themselves. This is one of those stories, and it started the night the vampire king chose to appear weak. The castle had stood for centuries, carved from black stone in memory. Its walls had seen wars, betrayals, and vows made under moonlight. Yet that night the halls felt strangely hollow, as if the castle itself was holding its breath. The servants moved carefully, whispering more than usual, glancing toward the upper chambers where their king was said to be ill. No one questioned it, not openly. The vampire king, once feared across kingdoms, now lay in a high-backed chair near the fire, his posture slightly bent, his breathing measured and slow. His silver hair was unbound, his expression softer than the legends described. To anyone watching, he looked tired, fragile even. But the weakness was deliberate. He had learned long ago that power showed people who they were afraid to be. Weakness showed them who they truly were. The king listened as footsteps echoed down the corridor. New ones, light, hesitant, the sound of someone unsure whether they belonged in a place like this. He did not turn his head. He kept his gaze fixed on the dying embers, allowing the silence to stretch. She entered quietly. The new maid was younger than most, her hands rough from work that never quite ended. Her dress was plain, too thin for the cold stone floors, and her dark hair was tied back with care that suggested pride, not vanity. She paused just inside the doorway, clearly unsure if she should speak. When she finally did, her voice was soft but steady. "My lord, they told me to tend the fires." The king nodded slowly, as if even that small movement cost him effort. She crossed the room, kneeling to add fresh wood. The fire flared, casting warm light across her face. There was something in her eyes that caught his attention. Not fear, not awe, awareness. The kind that comes from living a hard life and surviving it with dignity intact. Most servants avoided his gaze. She didn't. As she worked, she noticed the tremor in his hand resting on the arm of the chair. It was subtle, perfectly performed. Still, her brow tightened just a little. "Oh, you should be resting," she said before she could stop herself. Oh, the room seemed to freeze. Servants did not speak to him that way. Advising the vampire king was unheard of. The guards outside the door shifted, sensing something wrong. The king slowly turned his head and met her eyes. There was no anger in his expression, only curiosity. "And if I cannot," he asked quietly. She swallowed, realizing what she had done. But instead of apologizing, she lowered her gaze and answered honestly. "Then someone should stay nearby, just in case." Something deep in the king stirred. No one had spoken to him with concern in years. They spoke with loyalty, fear, admiration, never concern, never as if his well-being mattered beyond the stability of the throne. "You may stay," he said after a pause. Her relief was quick but controlled. She finished tending the fire, then stood awkwardly by the wall, unsure of her role now. The silence between them grew heavy, not uncomfortable, but loaded with unspoken thoughts. The king watched her from the corner of his eye. He had tested hundreds of people this way. Nobles, warriors, advisors. Some grew cruel when they believed him weak. Others grew ambitious. A few became careless. None became kind. "You haven't asked why I am ill," he said. Oh, she hesitated. "It didn't feel like my place. And yet you told me to rest." A small smile touched her lips before she could hide it. Oh, that felt human. The word lingered in the air. "Oh, human." The king looked back at the fire. "What is your name?" "Lyra," she replied. "I arrived this morning." "Why did you come here, Lyra?" She considered the question carefully. Work, safety, a roof that doesn't leak when it rains. He waited, he sensed there was more. And he pressed gently. She exhaled. "I heard the king here was different, that he ruled with silence instead of cruelty." The king's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. Different, if only she knew how hard he had tried to be. A sudden wave of pain passed through him, real this time. Old wounds, not of the body but of memory, his breath caught just for a moment. Lyra noticed. She stepped forward instinctively, reaching out before remembering who he was. Her hand hovered in the air, unsure. "Should I call someone?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. He shook his head slowly. "No." She lowered her hand but did not step away. Instead, she pulled a nearby chair closer and sat, leaving space between them that felt respectful, not distant. They sat like that in silence, the fire crackling softly. Outside, the wind howled against the towers, carrying the scent of winter. "Oh, you're not afraid," he said at last. "I am," she replied, "just not of you." That answer landed harder than any accusation. The king studied her openly now. Her hands bore scars from work, not battle. Her posture was tired but unbroken. She carried herself like someone who had lost much and chosen not to let it turn her bitter. For the first time in decades, he felt something dangerous. A hope. A guard suddenly entered the room, tense and hurried. "My lord," he said, bowing, "the council demands to see you. They believe your condition may affect." The king raised a hand to silence him. Lyra stood immediately, stepping back as if she had been caught somewhere she did not belong. The king did not look at the guard. His eyes remained on her. "Oh, stay," he said. The guard hesitated. "My lord." "She stays," the king repeated, his voice calm but unyielding. The guard bowed and retreated. Lyra's eyes widened. "I don't want to cause trouble." "Oh, you haven't," he said softly. "You've done the opposite." Oh, she didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. As the door closed, the king felt the weight of the choice he had just made. Bringing her into his presence was not part of the test. Protecting her from the council was not part of the plan. And yet he knew something had shifted. Because for the first time since he had chosen to appear weak, the Vampire King realized the greatest danger was no longer being exposed as strong. It was what might happen if this one Maid ever discovered the truth behind his mask. The silence she left behind felt heavier than the stone walls. Lyra walked the corridors with careful steps, her mind still echoing with the sound of his voice. She had served nobles before, men who demanded obedience, who mistook fear for respect. The Vampire King was different, not because he was gentle, but because his gentleness felt intentional, like a choice made every day. Behind the closed doors of the council chamber, voices rose and fell like distant thunder. Lyra was not meant to hear them, but the castle carried sound in strange ways. Words slipped through cracks in the walls. "A weakness invites rebellion. He should step aside. If the king cannot protect us, someone else will." She stopped walking. Her hand pressed against the cold stone as those words settled in her chest. They were not speaking of illness. They were speaking of opportunity. Inside the chamber, the Vampire King stood alone at the center of a long table. He leaned slightly on his cane, allowing the image of frailty to remain intact. Around him sat men and women dressed in dark finery, their expressions sharp, their loyalty conditional. "You question my rule because you believe I am failing," he said calmly. No one answered directly. That was answer enough. "The strength," one counselor finally said, "is what keeps this realm alive." Well, the king nodded. "And kindness." A few scoffed, one smiled thinly. "Kindness does not stop enemies." The king's gaze drifted, thoughtful. "It stops us from becoming them." They did not like that. Outside, Lyra listened without meaning to. She should have walked away. Instead, she found herself holding her breath as if her stillness might somehow protect him. The meeting ended abruptly. Doors opened. Counselors swept past her without acknowledgement, their faces set with private conclusions. Lyra stepped aside, lowering her head, but she watched their reflections in the polished floor. None looked satisfied, none looked loyal. Well, the vampire king emerged last. For a moment, the strength she had sensed in him faltered, not physically, emotionally. He paused in the doorway, his shoulders sinking just slightly, as if the weight of centuries had returned all at once. "My lord," she said before thinking, "are you all right?" He looked at her surprised, then something in his expression softened. "Walk with me," he said. They moved through the inner garden where moonlight spilled across frost-tipped leaves. The air smelled of earth and old roses. Here, away from ears and judgment, his steps grew steadier. The cane became unnecessary, though he still carried it. "Oh, you heard them," he said quietly. "It was not a question." "I did," Lyra admitted. "I'm sorry." He stopped beside a stone bench worn smooth by time. "Do you think they are right?" She hesitated. Speaking truth to power was dangerous, but something about him made honesty feel safe. "I think," she said slowly, "they are afraid, and afraid people confuse cruelty with strength." He studied her, the way one studies a fragile thing that might be more resilient than it appears. "Oh, you see more than most," he said. She shrugged faintly. "I've learned to listen." A long pause followed. The wind stirred the garden. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. "Why do you serve here?" he asked again, this time more softly. She looked down at her hands. "Because I needed work, and because I needed to believe a ruler could be decent." The word seemed to strike him. Decent. "I once believed that was enough," he said. She looked up, and now I'm not sure what this world deserves." Her chest tightened. She could hear the loneliness in his voice, the quiet exhaustion of someone who had carried too much for too long. Before she could respond, a sharp sound cut through the night, a distant scream, short, muffled, gone too quickly. The king's posture changed instantly. The weakness vanished. Lyra felt it before she saw it. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if the castle had suddenly recognized its true master. His eyes darkened, not with rage, but with focus, control. "What was that?" she whispered. The king did not answer. He was already moving. Stay here," he said, his voice low. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "You said I should stay." He turned back to her, and for the first time she saw a glimpse of what lay beneath the mask. Power, ancient and restrained, dangerous but guided by something far rarer. "Okay, not this time," he said gently. "This part is not meant for you." From the shadows at the edge of the garden, a guard appeared, pale and shaking. "My lord," he stammered, "the lower servants' wing, someone has been taken." Lyra's breath caught. The king's jaw tightened, a quiet fury settling behind his calm expression. "Who?" he asked. The guard hesitated. "The new maid," he said, "the one who arrived this morning." Lyra realized with sudden cold clarity that he was looking directly at her. And in that moment, the vampire king understood something that terrified him more than any rebellion ever could. Someone had targeted her. And this time, pretending to be weak might cost her life. The garden felt suddenly too small for the truth hanging between them. Lyra took a step back, her heart racing. "That's not possible," she said, even as fear crept into her voice. "I've been here with you." The guard looked from her to the king, confusion deepening. "Then there must be another," he muttered. "She had your description, same uniform." The king closed his eyes briefly. A test, a warning, or a mistake made by someone who did not yet understand how carefully he watched his people. "Take me there," he said. "No," Lyra blurted before she could stop herself. The word echoed sharply in the cold air. She swallowed, then steadied herself. "If someone is being used as bait, then I shouldn't be seen." The king studied her, surprised not by her fear but by her clarity. "You are thinking like a survivor," he said. I've had to, she replied quietly. He turned to the guard. Secure the inner wing, no council members, no questions. If anyone interferes, they answer to me. The guard bowed and hurried off. The king faced Lyra again. You will stay in my chambers tonight. Her eyes widened. My lord. It is not a request, he said gently, and it is not a favor, it is protection. She hesitated, pride and caution warring inside her. Then she nodded. All right. They walked in silence through corridors now lined with shadow. Torches flickered, their light restless. The castle no longer felt like a home, it felt like a maze. Inside his chambers, the warmth surprised her. Books lined the walls. Old, well-worn, a fire burned steadily, not for show, but for comfort. This was not the room of a tyrant. It was the room of someone who spent long nights thinking. You may rest here, he said, indicating a small sitting room connected by an archway. Lock the door, do not open it for anyone but me. She nodded, then paused. And you? I will find out who dared to use my people as leverage, he replied calmly. There was no anger in his voice. That frightened her more than rage would have. As he turned to leave, she spoke again. Why are you protecting me? Well, he stopped. Because you spoke to me as if I mattered, he said without turning around. And because whoever did this believes kindness is a weakness. The door closed behind him. Alone, Lyra sat by the fire, wrapping her arms around herself. Her mind replayed every word, every look from earlier that night. She had entered the castle hoping for safety. Now she felt closer to danger than ever before. Hours passed slowly. Then footsteps outside. No, not his. She froze, listening. The steps were careful, almost respectful. A soft knock followed, barely audible. Lyra, a voice whispered, it's me. She stood, heart pounding. She recognized the voice, one of the senior maids, kind, always smiling. Her hand hovered over the lock. My lord told me not to open the door, Lyra said. A pause. I know, the voice replied softly. He sent me, he's hurt. Lyra's breath caught. He said to bring you, the voice continued. There's blood. Something felt wrong, too quiet, too rehearsed. Lyra stepped back from the door. I'll wait for him, she said. The voice outside shifted, hardened, opened the door. Fear surged through her chest. She backed away, shaking her head though no one could see her. Suddenly, the door burst inward with a crack of splintering wood. Lyra screamed and stumbled back as a cloaked figure stepped inside, face hidden, movements quick and precise. You should have opened it, the figure said coldly. Before she could run, the intruder grabbed her wrist. The fire flared violently, shadows leaping across the walls. And in that instant, the vampire king appeared in the doorway. Not weak, not tired. His presence filled the room like a storm held perfectly still. Oh, release her, he said. The intruder laughed nervously, so the rumors were true. The king did not move closer. He did not need to. You came for her, he said, his voice low, but you were meant to find me. The intruder hesitated, grip loosening just enough. Lyra felt it, the opening. She twisted free and fell back as the vampire king stepped forward, eyes glowing faintly, not with fury but with resolve. You wanted to see my strength, he said quietly. Now you will see my mercy. The intruder froze, trembling. And Lyra realized, with a mix of awe and fear, that the greatest danger in this castle was no longer the one holding the knife. It was what the vampire king was about to choose to do next. The room held its breath. The intruder dropped to their knees without being touched, as if the air itself had pressed them down. The vampire king stood between Lyra and danger, his posture calm, his power restrained with terrifying precision. Please, the figure whispered, voice shaking. I was told you wouldn't fight back. The king's gaze never left them, and yet you came armed. Lyra's heart pounded as she watched him closely. This was the moment when legends were born, when monsters revealed themselves. She braced for cruelty. It never came. Who sent you? The king asked. The intruder's shoulders trembled. The council doesn't know, they said quickly. Not all of them, just a few. They said if the maid disappeared, you'd retreat further, that the people would lose faith. Lyra's breath caught. The king closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in anger, in grief. You would break the innocent to test the throne, he said quietly. That is not leadership, that is cowardice. Guards rushed in, weapons raised. At a single glance from the king, they froze, lowering their blades. Take this one to the lower cells, he said. No chains, no harm, they will speak again when fear is gone. The intruder looked up in disbelief. You're letting me live. I am letting you remember you are human, the king replied. As the guards led the shaken figure away, Lyra realized her hands were trembling, not from fear anymore, from something heavier. Odrasd. The king turned to her, the power faded from his eyes, replaced by something quieter, concern. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head. No, but they used my name. He nodded. That is why this ends tonight. Before she could ask what he meant, a horn sounded from the eastern tower. Low, urgent. The king stiffened. That horn hasn't been blown in decades, he murmured. Another guard appeared, breathless. My lord, the outer villages, fires, someone is spreading word that the king has fallen ill beyond recovery. They are calling for a new ruler. The room seemed to tilt. Lyra felt the weight of the moment settle on her chest. This was bigger than her, bigger than a single test. They are moving faster than I expected, the king said. He looked at her then, really looked, as if weighing a truth he could no longer ignore. You were never meant to be part of this, he said softly, and yet here you are. She met his gaze, steady despite the fear. If they hurt people to weaken you, then staying silent won't protect anyone. Something in his expression changed, respect sharp and unmistakable. You should leave the castle, he said. Tonight I can send you somewhere safe. She shook her head slowly. If I go now, they win. They already think kindness makes you weak. Let them see what it actually creates. The words hung between them, fragile and brave. Outside, the horns sounded again, closer this time. The king exhaled, a long breath that felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Very well, he said, but understand this. Once I stop pretending, there will be no quiet nights for you again. I wasn't looking for quiet, Lyra replied. I was looking for meaning. For a moment, the centuries-old ruler looked almost young. He turned toward the balcony overlooking the city. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, carried by the wind. The people were restless, afraid. And fear was a spark that spread quickly. Stay close to me, he said. As they stepped into the cold night air, the vampire king made a decision that would change everything. The mask of weakness would fall. And when the people saw who he truly was, not all of them would be ready for it. The night did not welcome them gently. From the balcony, the city looked like a sea of shadows broken by trembling lights. Fires burned at the edges, small but deliberate, meant to frighten more than destroy. The wind carried distant shouts, confused and angry, woven together by rumor. The vampire king stood tall now. No cane, no careful slowness. The illusion of weakness had dissolved, and in its place stood something older than fear itself. But Lyra noticed what others would have missed. His hands were steady, yet his eyes carried weight, not hunger for power, responsibility. They think you are hiding, she said quietly. I was, he replied, just not in the way they believe. Below, the city gates creaked as a crowd gathered, torches lifted. Voices rose, not all were hostile, some were frightened, some desperate, and a few eager. The king stepped forward, his voice carrying without effort. People of the realm, he called. The sound cut through the noise like a calm river through fire. I hear your fear. The crowd stilled. Even from above, Lyra could sense it. They had expected thunder, threats. They had not expected understanding. They tell you I am weak, the king continued, that I am unfit to protect you. A murmur rippled through the masses. I will not deny that I chose to appear fragile, he said. I did it to see who would stand for this kingdom when strength seemed absent. Gasps of confusion. Lyra's breath caught. He was not just revealing power, he was revealing truth. And now, he said, you stand here not because you were attacked, but because someone whispered that fear should guide you. A man shouted from the crowd, then prove you can still protect us. Oh, the king did not flinch. A protection, the word echoed through him. Oh, he raised one hand. The fires at the edge of the city dimmed, not extinguished by force, but starved of wind, as if the night itself had decided enough was enough. The air grew still. The torches burned steady instead of wild. A demonstration, controlled, careful. Lyra watched the crowd change in real time. Fear softened into awe, anger into uncertainty. You see power, the king said, but power is not what keeps a realm alive. Trust does. Oh, he lowered his hand. From behind them, a voice cut through the moment. Beautiful words, a counselor said, stepping onto the balcony. But words don't change centuries of rule. Several figures followed, faces familiar now, the ones who had smiled during council meetings, the ones who had whispered in corners. They used her, Lyra realized softly. The king nodded, I know. The counselor gestured toward Lyra. You let a servant stand beside you while the realm burns. That alone proves your weakness. Lyra felt the weight of every eye turned toward her. Oh, the king did not move her aside. Instead, he did something no ruler had done before. She stands here because she chose courage over silence, he said, and because she reminds me who this throne is meant to serve. The counselor laughed. Then let her serve you now, choose her or choose your crown. Oh, the threat was clear. The crowd below stirred again, tension rebuilding. One wrong move and everything would shatter. Lyra felt fear coil in her chest, but she did not step back. She looked at the king. If you step down for me, she whispered, they'll never stop using people like this. He met her gaze, and in that moment, she saw something ancient and gentle collide inside him. I will not step down, he said softly, and I will not sacrifice you. He turned to the counselors, his voice firm but sorrowful. You wanted to see what happens when kindness leads, he said. Now watch. He raised his voice again, carrying to the crowd. These men and women sought to rule you through fear. Tonight they answer not to me, but to the people they betrayed. Guards moved in, surrounding the counselors. The crowd below erupted, not in rage, but in realization. The counselor's smile faltered. You'll tear the realm apart doing this. The king shook his head slowly. No, I'm giving it back. As the counselors were taken away, Lyra felt the ground beneath her shift. Not just the castle, the future. But even as hope rose, she sensed it. A presence, old, patient, watching from the dark beyond the city walls. The king felt it too. And he knew the hardest test was still coming. Because the greatest enemy had not spoken, yet dawn did not arrive with celebration. It came quietly, pale light slipping over the towers, touching stone that had known too many secrets. The city below was silent now, not from fear, but from exhaustion. People stood in doorways and on rooftops, watching, waiting to see what kind of morning this would be. Well, the vampire king had not slept. Neither had Lyra. They stood together in the eastern hall, where tall windows faced the rising sun. For the first time, its light touched his face fully, revealing not a monster, not a legend, but a ruler shaped by centuries of restraint. Oh, you felt it too, he said. Yes, Lyra replied, like being watched by something that doesn't rush. He nodded, old powers never do. A shadow moved at the far end of the hall, not sudden, not violent. It stepped forward as if it had always belonged there. The Ancient One. Few had seen it and lived long enough to speak of it. Not a beast, not a demon. A presence tied to the earliest bloodlines. Its voice, when it spoke, sounded like memory more than sound. Oh, you chose mercy, it said, again. The king inclined his head slightly. I chose the realm. The Ancient One's gaze shifted to Lyra. You chose her. Lyra felt the weight of that attention press into her bones, but she did not look away. She reminded me, the king said, that power without compassion decays. The silence that followed stretched long and dangerous. For centuries, the Ancient One said slowly, our kind ruled by fear. It was efficient. And empty, the king replied. The Ancient One studied him, then looked to the city beyond the windows. The people will test this change. Some will betray it, some will break it. I know, the king said. So will I if I forget why it began. The Ancient One turned back to Lyra. You are fragile, it said, not unkindly. You will age, you will fade. Lyra swallowed, I know. And still you stayed. Oh, yes. The Ancient One exhaled, a sound like stone settling into place. Then this reign continues, not because of strength, because of balance. The presence began to dissolve into light and shadow, leaving the hall warmer than before. When it was gone, the king released a breath he had been holding for centuries. It's over, Lyra whispered. No, he said gently, it's begun. They walked together into the courtyard where the people waited. The king stood before them, not elevated, not distant, simply present. This realm will not be ruled by fear, he said, nor by silence. If I fail you, you may speak. If you suffer, you will be seen. The crowd did not cheer. They listened. That was better. Later, as the castle settled into a new rhythm, Lyra stood alone by the garden where it had all started. The fireflies had returned. The roses were blooming again. The king joined her quietly. I never intended to stop pretending, he said. She smiled softly. You never intended to be alone either. He looked at her, something unspoken resting between them. Trust, respect, a future neither had planned. Oh, you changed everything, he said. She shook her head. You were already changing. I just refused to look away. The sun rose higher, bathing the castle in gold. And for the first time in generations, the vampire king ruled not as a shadow over his people, but as a guardian standing among them. Peace, Lyra learned, was never loud. It arrived in small signs, the way servants stopped whispering when they walked the halls, the way guards loosened their grip on their weapons, the way people began to look up instead of down when the vampire king passed. Days turned into weeks. The castle changed first. Doors once closed were left slightly open. Councils became conversations. Even the air felt different, as if the stone itself had softened after centuries of holding its breath. Yet beneath that calm, something remained unsettled. Lyra felt it when she woke at night, a quiet pull in her chest, like a question that had not yet found its words. One evening, as rain traced slow lines down the tall windows, the king asked her to walk with him beyond the inner walls. No guards, no ceremony. They crossed into the old part of the city where houses leaned close together and lanterns burned low. People noticed them, of course. Some bowed, others simply watched. A few smiled, uncertain but hopeful. You don't belong out here, Lyra said softly, not without protection. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why I am. They stopped near a small shelter where families had gathered to escape the rain. A child stared at him openly, eyes wide but unafraid. The king knelt, meeting the child at eye level. "What's your name?" he asked. "Iren," the boy replied. "Do you know who I am?" The boy shrugged. "You're the one who fixed the fires." The king laughed quietly. Lyra felt something warm tighten in her chest. As they walked on, she finally spoke the thought she had been carrying. "They'll expect more from you now," she said. "Not fear, not distance, but presence." "I know," he replied. "That's the risk." She stopped walking. "And what about you?" Well, he turned to face her. "For centuries, I defined myself by restraint," he said, "by what I denied myself for the sake of rule." "And now," she asked, "now I'm learning that sacrifice without connection becomes another kind of cruelty." The rain eased. Silence settled between them, not empty but full. "You could leave," he added gently. "Live a quiet life, no one would blame you." Lyra considered it, a small home, simple work, days without danger. Then she looked back toward the city, toward the people who were learning slowly to trust again. "I don't want quiet," she said. "I want honest." Something shifted in his expression, not power, not command. "Choice." "Then stay," he said, "not as a servant, as a witness, as a reminder." She nodded. "I can do that." Above them, the clouds began to part, moonlight slipping through like a promise that was still being written. Far beyond the city, in places untouched by light, other forces stirred. Change always echoed outward. Balance always drew attention. The vampire king felt it. He always would. But this time, he did not face the future alone. As they turned back toward the castle, walking side by side, Lyra understood something clearly for the first time. The story everyone feared was not about a ruler losing his strength. It was about a kingdom learning what strength was meant to protect. The first true test came without warning. Not with fire, not with blades, but with hunger. A drought settled over the southern lands, slow and unforgiving. Crops failed. Caravans stopped arriving. The kind of problem rulers used to solve from a distance, with numbers and orders sent through sealed letters. Well, the vampire king did neither. He went himself. Lyra rode beside him as they crossed into villages where the earth had cracked open like old scars. People watched in disbelief as the ruler dismounted, knelt in the dust, and listened, not to reports, to voices. A farmer spoke of losing 3 children to sickness. A mother spoke of choosing which child would eat. An elder spoke of giving up hope long before giving up land. The king did not promise miracles. He promised presence. Granaries were opened, trade routes rerouted. Old alliances once ignored were honored again. None of it was dramatic, all of it mattered. At night, when the campfires burned low, Lyra watched him sit alone, shoulders heavy, eyes distant. "Oh, you feel everything," she said once. "I always have," he replied. "I just used to hide it better." She sat beside him. "You don't have to now." That was when he understood the final truth. Strength was never about standing above suffering. It was about standing inside it without turning away. Weeks later, rain finally came, soft at first, then steady. The land breathed again. When they returned to the capital, the people were waiting, not with torches, with food, flowers, children on shoulders, no chants, just quiet gratitude. The king stood before them, Lyra at his side. "I once believed ruling meant enduring alone," he said. "I was wrong." He turned slightly toward her, then back to the crowd. "This realm changed because one person refused to see weakness where there was humanity. Let that be our law now." No crown was raised, no decree carved in stone. But something far stronger took root. Later, as evening settled over the castle, Lyra stood again in the garden where everything had begun. The roses were in full bloom now. "Well, you never asked me to stay forever," she said. "I never wanted to bind you," he replied. She smiled, then listened carefully. "I'm choosing this." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in that moment the centuries between them felt small. Not erased, respected. Side by side, they watched the lights of the city glow to life one by one. The vampire king was no longer pretending to be weak. Well, he was strong enough to be seen. And the kingdom he guarded would never be ruled by fear again. The kingdom settled into a rhythm no one had been taught to expect. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. Mistakes were made openly now. When grain shipments arrived late, the reason was spoken aloud. When disputes rose between villages, the king did not send judgment first. He sent listeners. And still, not everyone welcomed the change. Lyra noticed it in the quiet corners, in glances that lingered too long, in voices that softened when the king approached, then hardened again once he passed. Fear does not vanish just because truth appears. Sometimes it hides and waits. One evening, long after the city had gone to sleep, Lyra found the king standing alone in the old council chamber. The long table was empty now, no scheming voices, no shadows leaning in. "Oh, you come here often," she said gently. He nodded, to remember who I was afraid of becoming. She walked closer. "And are you?" He considered the question for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "power doesn't disappear, it tempts, it whispers that control would be faster, cleaner." "And what stops you?" she asked. He looked at her. "You do." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Before she could answer, a messenger arrived, breathless but composed. "My lord, a delegation from the northern borders, they ask for sanctuary." "Why?" the king asked. "They say their ruler chose fear. Executions, silence, people are fleeing." The room fell quiet. Lyra felt the familiar tension return, the pull of responsibility, the knowledge that kindness always invites its own challenges. "If we take them in," she said slowly, "others will follow." "Well, yes," the king replied, "and some will come not for peace but to test it." Oh, the messenger waited. Oh, the king did not hesitate. "Open the gates," he said. "Prepare food and shelter, no questions asked tonight." As the messenger hurried away, Lyra searched his face. "You know this will stretch the kingdom." "I know," he said, "but closing the door would break it." She exhaled softly, a mix of fear and pride tightening her chest. "Oh, you're still pretending in one way," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You act like you're carrying this alone," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Old habits." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't have to be a symbol every moment. You're allowed to be tired." For the first time, he let himself lean back against the table, just slightly, just enough. "I am tired," he admitted. She stayed, no advice, no reassurance, just presence. Outside, dawn began to form, slow and patient. "The world beyond these walls is changing," he said. "Some will call what we're doing weakness. Others will call it dangerous. And some," Lyra said, "will call it hope." He looked at her, something steady and unshakable settling between them. "Oh, then let them," he said. As the sun rose, casting light into the chamber that had once held so much fear, the vampire king understood something at last. He no longer needed to pretend to be weak, because the strength he had chosen could not be taken from him. And whatever came next, this kingdom would face it together. The hardest endings never arrive with noise. They come with a choice that feels small, almost ordinary, and only later do you understand it changed everything. The northern refugees settled into the outer districts slowly. Some brought skills, some brought wounds that were not visible. A few brought anger they did not yet know how to release. The city stretched, not without strain, but it held. One night, long after the gates had closed, a final message arrived. Not a threat, not a demand. An invitation. A neighboring ruler, powerful and ancient in his own way, requested a private meeting beyond the border. No guards, no witnesses. A test disguised as diplomacy. Lyra read the letter first. "This is a trap," she said simply. "Oh, yes," the king replied, "and a necessary one." They stood in the quiet hall where sunlight once revealed his true face for the first time. The air felt calm but resolved. "If you go," she said, "they'll expect the old king, fear, distance, superiority." He nodded, "And if I don't, they'll believe kindness only survives behind walls." She looked at him, seeing both the ruler and the man he had allowed himself to become. "Then don't go as a king," she said, "go as proof." At dawn, he crossed the border alone. No crown, no armor, just a dark cloak and a steady pace. The meeting lasted hours. No one knows exactly what was said, only that voices were raised, then lowered. That silence stretched longer than threats ever do. When the vampire king returned, the city was waiting. Well, he did not announce victory. He simply said, "There will be no war." And that was enough. Weeks later, the neighboring lands opened trade instead of sharpening blades. Refugees returned home by choice, not force. Fear loosened its grip little by little. On the evening that marked 1 year since the night he had pretended to be weak, Lyra stood beside him on the same balcony. "Oh, you changed the story they tell about you," she said. He shook his head gently. "No, you did. You reminded me that power doesn't need to be loud to last." Below them, children played where torches once burned. Laughter drifted upward, unafraid. "What happens now?" she asked. He looked out at the kingdom, then back at her. "And now," he said, "we live what we built." The castle no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. And the legend that survived was not of a vampire king who pretended to be weak, but of a ruler who discovered that true strength begins the moment you stop hiding your humanity.